The tray trembled in her hands, paper cups clinking dangerously as Savannah Miller hurried down the hallway. It was her first week as an intern at Black Couture, and already she had been reduced to coffee duty. 12 lattes to a and 1 oat milk cappuccino, with extra foam orders rattled off by designers who hadn't even looked at her face. Her sneakers squeaked on the polished marble floor as she reached the elevator bank. "Don't spill it, don't spill it," she chanted silently, adjusting her grip. The stainless steel doors slid open, and she stepped inside without looking, praying the elevator would be empty. It wasn't. The man standing inside wore a charcoal suit cut to perfection, his posture rigid, his presence sharp enough to slice the air. Savannah recognized him instantly from company orientation slides, from glossy magazine covers, from whispered conversations around the office. Ethan Black, CEO of Black Couture. Her heart stuttered, her palms dampened, and then, disaster. As the doors closed, the elevator jolted slightly. One of the cups tipped, then another, and in a blur of heat and panic, coffee sloshed straight onto the sleeve of his pristine suit. Savannah gasped, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." For a moment, silence reigned. He looked down at his arm, then at her, his gray eyes as cold as the marble floor beneath them. He didn't shout, didn't flinch, just leveled her with a gaze that made her feel about 3 inches tall. "Do you always carry beverages like live grenades?" Ethan said flatly. "Or is this a special occasion?" Savannah fumbled for napkins, blotting uselessly at the wool. "It was an accident, I swear." Accidents," he cut in, his voice smooth and sharp, "are unacceptable in this building." Heat burned her cheeks. She wanted to vanish, melt into the floor, but the elevator dinged, the doors opened, and he stepped out without another glance, leaving her with a tray of lukewarm coffees and a sinking feeling that her internship had just ended before it began. Black Couture was a fortress of glass and steel, its offices spanning the top 20 floors of a Manhattan skyscraper. It wasn't just a company, it was an empire, dictating trends that rippled across the fashion capitals of the world. And at its helm was Ethan Black, 30, brilliant, ruthless, with a reputation as both a visionary and a tyrant. Born into privilege, educated at the best schools, he had taken his father's boutique label and expanded it into a global powerhouse. Industry insiders admired him, feared him, whispered about his icy composure and relentless pursuit of perfection. To Savannah, he was terrifying and intoxicating. She was 22, fresh out of design school, the daughter of a single mother who'd worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. She had dreamed of sketch pads and fabrics since childhood, of one day seeing her name on a label. Getting into Black Couture as an intern was like stepping into the palace of the gods. But now, after one spilled coffee, she feared she might be cast out of Olympus before she'd even touched a sewing machine. That afternoon, her fears were confirmed, or so she thought. She was summoned to the 27th floor, where glass walls revealed panoramic views of the city, and assistants clicked around in stilettos that cost more than her rent. Her stomach twisted as she followed the receptionist down the corridor. At the end of it, through double doors, waited the lion's den, the CEO's office. Ethan Black sat behind a desk of polished black wood, every inch of him immaculate, despite the faint stain that still marked his sleeve. He didn't look up as she entered, merely flipped through a folder. "Savannah Miller," he said, his tone clipped. "Design intern." "Yes, sir," she managed, clutching her hands together to stop them shaking. "You lasted 3 days without incident." He closed the folder, and finally looked at her, his gaze cool. "That streak ended this morning." She opened her mouth to apologize again, but he raised a hand. "Save it. You're here because I don't tolerate incompetence." However, he leaned back, studying her as though she were a flawed sketch. "I also don't waste potential. Your academic file is strong. The director of your program spoke highly of your eye for detail. I suggest you prove him right." Her heart skipped. "You're not firing me?" The faintest flicker of amusement touched his mouth, gone almost before it appeared. "Not yet. But one more accident, and you'll be out the door. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Get back to work." Dismissed. Savannah fled the office, pulse racing. Relief washed over her, quickly followed by determination. She might have started as the clumsy intern with coffee stains, but she would not end that way. Elsewhere in the building, another woman watched Savannah's hurried exit with narrowed eyes. Victoria Lane was 30, head of marketing, and the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Born into an old money family, she wore power like perfume, subtle, intoxicating, impossible to ignore. For years, she had angled herself close to Ethan Black, believing that proximity would one day turn into intimacy. She respected his brilliance, admired his command, and, though she would never say it aloud, longed to be the woman at his side. The arrival of a new intern should not have concerned her. Yet something about Savannah's wide-eyed innocence and the fact that Ethan hadn't immediately dismissed her sparked a flicker of irritation. "Interesting," Victoria murmured to herself, a smile curving her lips. She would be watching this Savannah Miller very closely. That night, back in her tiny apartment in Queens, Savannah collapsed onto her bed with her sketchbook. She had survived the day, survived Ethan Black's wrath, survived humiliation, and somehow, beneath the fear, she felt a strange spark. He had called her file strong. He had said he wouldn't waste potential. Savannah flipped open the sketchbook, pencil racing across the page. If she was going to survive Black Couture, she would have to do more than fetch coffee. She would have to show Ethan Black and everyone else that she belonged here. And maybe, just maybe, the next time their paths crossed, it wouldn't be with coffee dripping down his sleeve. Savannah's second week at Black Couture started with the same humiliating routine, delivering coffee. She had memorized the orders by now, darting through the studio with trays in hand, while designers shouted for swatches and assistants balanced garment bags on their shoulders. It was chaos, disguised as creativity, and somehow, Savannah loved it. Every corner of the 26th floor thrummed with energy fabric bolts stacked like towers, dress forms pinned with half-finished gowns, mood boards plastered with images ripped from magazines. It was intoxicating, the smell of muslin and marker ink, the hum of sewing machines. Here, the future of fashion was being built, and she was part of it, even if only in the smallest way. Still, she couldn't ignore the weight of eyes on her. Some interns came from wealthy families, their surnames alone opening doors. Others were protégés of established designers, fast-tracked into positions of influence. Savannah was neither. She was the girl from Queens with a degree, a scholarship kid with talent but no pedigree. And in this world, pedigree mattered. "You missed a spot," one of the senior assistants said when Savannah set down a tray of coffees. "Next time, write the names. People don't like to guess." Savannah bit her tongue, murmured an apology, and returned to her desk, a cramped corner, with a stack of fabric samples and a second-hand laptop. She opened her sketchbook under the desk, letting her pencil wander. It was the only thing that kept her sane, designing in secret, even if no one ever saw it. That afternoon, a surprise email flashed across her screen. Mandatory. All design interns report to conference room A. 4 p.m. sharp. Her pulse quickened. It wasn't often interns were summoned by the executive team. She straightened her blouse, tried to tame her curls, and hurried down the hall with the others. Inside, Ethan Black stood at the head of the table. Even in a simple navy suit, he radiated authority. His gaze swept the room like a searchlight, pausing just long enough to make each intern squirm. "We have an event this Friday," he said. His voice was smooth, deep, utterly commanding. "The annual gala for global fashion. Black Couture is a sponsor, and our presence will be scrutinized." Savannah's chest tightened. The gala wasn't just an event, it was the event. Designers, editors, celebrities, investors, everyone who mattered would be there. Normally, Ethan continued, I would select senior staff to attend. However, due to scheduling conflicts, one intern will accompany me as support staff. His eyes moved over them, cool and calculating. This is not a reward. It is work. You will take notes, manage contacts, and ensure my schedule runs without interruption. If you fail, you're done here. A ripple of whispers filled the room. Every intern wanted the spot. To be seen at the gala was a career-making opportunity. Ethan raised a hand. Silence. I'll decide based on recent performance. His gaze shifted straight to Savannah. Her stomach flipped. Savannah Miller, he said, you'll accompany me. Shock froze her in place. Around her, whispers grew louder, tinged with envy. She opened her mouth to protest. Why her? The girl who spilled coffee on him. But Ethan's expression brooked no argument. 4 p.m. Friday, he said, be prepared. And just like that, her fate was sealed. Back at her desk, Savannah's nerves unraveled. She'd been chosen. Why? Out of everyone, why her? Theories buzzed in her head until a shadow fell across her desk. Victoria Lane leaned against the partition, her red lipstick a slash of confidence against flawless skin. Congratulations, Victoria purred. The gala is a big deal. Ethan must see something in you. Savannah blinked. I guess so. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Just don't get too comfortable. Ethan doesn't tolerate mistakes. One misstep, and he'll drop you faster than last season's trend. With that, she pivoted on stiletto heels and glided away. Leaving Savannah rattled, she pressed her palms to her sketchbook, steadying herself. It's just one night. Do your job, stay invisible, and survive. But deep down, a spark of hope flickered. Maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to prove she belonged. Friday arrived faster than Savannah expected. By noon, her nerves were shot. She'd spent the week juggling tasks at the office while secretly panicking about the gala. She had nothing to wear, nothing that could possibly belong in a ballroom filled with celebrities, in couture gowns worth more than her college tuition. But Black Couture thought of everything. That morning, she was escorted to the styling department, where a team of professionals descended on her like artists with a blank canvas. Skin like porcelain, one murmured, brushing foundation across her cheek. Eyes like amber, another added, pressing eyeliner with surgical precision. Let's not overwhelm her, the stylist in charge said. Classic, understated elegance. That's what will catch attention. For hours, Savannah sat in the chair, barely recognizing the woman taking shape in the mirror. When they zipped her into a gown from the upcoming collection, a sleek midnight blue number that shimmered under the lights, her breath caught. The dress hugged her waist, skimmed her curves, and draped into a soft train that whispered against the floor. Her hair was swept into loose waves, a diamond pendant borrowed from the accessories archive resting at her collarbone. She looked like she belonged. Careful, one stylist teased. Don't outshine the models. Savannah laughed nervously, her palms damp. She had never worn anything so exquisite in her life. For the first time, she wondered if she could step into that ballroom and not feel like an imposter. The town car waited downstairs, polished black and gleaming. When she slid inside, Ethan was already seated. He wore a black tuxedo with a bow tie, his hair slicked back, his expression unreadable. Savannah froze for a moment, struck by how impossibly sharp he looked. He glanced up from his phone, his gray eyes sweeping over her. The silence stretched. Then, very quietly, he exhaled through his nose and tipped back the glass of scotch in his hand, draining it in one swallow. Savannah's pulse hammered. Had she done something wrong? Did she look ridiculous? You're on schedule, he said finally, his voice clipped. That's good. She nodded quickly, folding her hands in her lap. "Yes, sir." The ride passed in silence, tension crackling in the confined space. Savannah stared out the tinted window, Manhattan flashing by in glittering streaks. She told herself not to fidget, not to speak unless spoken to. But inside, her mind was a storm. Why did he look at me like that? The gala for global fashion was held at the Met, its grand steps lined with photographers and flashing bulbs. A crimson carpet unfurled up to the towering doors, where a sea of gowns and tuxedos glittered under chandeliers. As Ethan stepped out of the car, the crowd surged. Cameras flashed, reporters called his name, and he handled it all with practiced composure. Then he turned, offering a hand to Savannah. Her heels wobbled on the carpet, but his grip was steady, firm. For a brief second, their eyes met, and she swore she saw something flicker. There's something that made her stomach flip. They walked together through the chaos. Her arm looped through his. Whispers followed them, a wave of speculation. "Who's that, with black? New model?" "No, I heard she's an intern." "An intern? You're kidding?" Savannah's cheeks burned, but Ethan's expression didn't change. He guided her up the steps and into the museum, where the noise dimmed into an atmosphere of hushed opulence. Inside the ballroom was a dream. Marble columns soared into painted ceilings. Golden light glimmered off crystal chandeliers, and waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of champagne. Guests mingled in gowns that sparkled like constellations, laughter rising above the string quartet's music. Savannah felt dizzy. She had grown up watching clips of this gala on television, never imagining she'd stand here in person. She clutched her small clutch, resisting the urge to gape. "Stay close," Ethan murmured, his hand at the small of her back. "There are people you'll need to meet." She nodded, her heart pounding at the sudden warmth of his touch. They moved through the crowd like a power duo, though Savannah still felt like a fraud in borrowed diamonds. Ethan introduced her to editors from Vogue, buyers from Paris, and investors with accents that dripped old money. Each time, he spoke her name clearly. "Savannah Miller, one of our design interns." Her throat tightened every time. He didn't dismiss her. He didn't hide her. He named her, and for once, she felt seen. An hour into the event, Savannah excused herself to catch her breath. She slipped onto the terrace overlooking Fifth Avenue, cool night air brushing her flushed cheeks. She leaned against the balustrade, exhaling slowly. "You clean up well," a voice drawled behind her. She turned to find Victoria Lane, draped in scarlet silk that clung to her figure like flame. Her eyes glittered with something sharper than the diamonds at her ears. "Victoria," Savannah said, forcing politeness. "You must be enjoying yourself," Victoria continued, sipping champagne. Quite the leap from coffee runs to champagne toasts. Savannah bristled. "I'm here to work." "Of course you are." Victoria's smile was sweet poison. "But don't mistake a borrowed spotlight for your own. Ethan is generous, but his attention doesn't last. Don't set yourself up for disappointment." Before Savannah could respond, Ethan appeared. His presence shifted the air, his gaze flicking between the two women. "Savannah," he said smoothly, "the editor from Harper's Bazaar is waiting. Let's go." She followed him back inside, her pulse racing not just from Victoria's words, but from the protective edge in Ethan's voice. The night stretched on, a blur of introductions and clinking glasses. Savannah began to find her rhythm, smiling, shaking hands, taking mental notes. Ethan's presence beside her was both a shield and a distraction. Every time his hand brushed her arm to guide her through the crowd, heat rushed to her skin at one point as the string quartet swelled into a familiar waltz. A designer clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Dance, Black. You work too hard." Ethan gave a polite smile. Not tonight. But the designer's wife, already tipsy, turned to Savannah. "Oh, but you should dance. You're young, beautiful, it's a crime not to." Savannah laughed nervously. shaking her head. I know. I can't. Then Ethan's hand closed gently over hers. One dance, he said quietly, as though it were an order. The floor opened before them, and Savannah found herself swept into his arms. His movements were precise, practiced. Hers were clumsy, but he guided her effortlessly, under the golden light. Surrounded by the glittering elite, Savannah realized she wasn't thinking about being an imposter. She wasn't thinking about spilled coffee or borrowed gowns. She was thinking about the warmth of Ethan's hand at her waist, the steady rhythm of his breath, and the way his eyes softened when they met hers. The song ended too soon. Applause rippled, and they stepped apart. Ethan cleared his throat, his composure snapping back into place. He signaled for a waiter, grabbed a glass of champagne, and downed it in one swallow. Savannah bit back a smile. For the first time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one fighting nerves tonight. The gala wound on, glittering and relentless. By midnight, Savannah's cheeks ached from smiling. Her feet throbbed in heels she wasn't used to, and yet she felt strangely alive. She had floated through conversations she never dreamed of having, clinked glasses with people she'd only seen on magazine covers, and survived. But survival didn't mean safety. Victoria had a way of appearing whenever Savannah began to relax, sliding into conversations with calculated ease. "Oh, Ethan," Victoria said at one point, looping her arm through his, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Have you told Savannah about the Milan expansion? It's fascinating." Ethan disentangled himself politely, his expression unreadable. "That's not a conversation for tonight." Savannah tried not to squirm, but the message was clear. Victoria belonged in his world. She spoke the language of investments and marketing campaigns, glided through the crowd like she'd been born under Savannah, by comparison, was still learning to balance a flute of champagne without spilling it. Later, when Ethan stepped away to greet a group of investors, Victoria seized her chance. "You know he doesn't let just anyone in," she said, her smile as sharp as glass. "I've worked beside him for years, earned his trust. Whatever this little internship is, it won't last." Savannah forced her voice steady. "I'm not trying to take your place." Victoria's eyes glittered. "You don't have to try. Just being here, it changes things. And trust me, Ethan Black doesn't change easily." Before Savannah could reply, Ethan returned. Victoria's expression flipped into bright charm, but Savannah caught the flash of warning in her gaze. By 1 a.m., the crowd began to thin. Savannah found herself back on the terrace, the night air cool against her flushed skin. Below, Fifth Avenue sparkled with headlights, the city that never slept humming softly. She wrapped her arms around herself, exhaling. For once, she wanted a moment without eyes watching, without whispers trailing behind her. Cold. She turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, jacket slung over one arm. "A little," she admitted. Without a word, he draped the jacket over her shoulders. It smelled faintly of his cologne crisp, with an undertone she couldn't name but would never forget. "Thank you," she said. Softly, he leaned against the balustrade beside her, silent for a moment. The city stretched below them, endless and alive. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said at last. Savannah blinked. "I thought I barely survived." His mouth curved, just slightly. "That's more than most people do their first time." She laughed, the sound bubbling out before she could stop it. The tension between them shifted, softened, like fabric draping into a new shape. "I don't know how you do it," she admitted. "Walk into a room like that and own it. Everyone looks at you, listens to you. I'd be terrified." "You were terrified," he said simply. "But you didn't crumble. That's the difference." Her cheeks warmed. Praise from Ethan Black was rarer than diamonds, and she felt the weight of it settle into her chest. For a moment, silence stretched again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The hum of the city filled it, the warmth of his jacket anchoring her. Then he turned, his gaze sharp even in the dim light. "Don't let Victoria rattle you." Savannah stiffened. "You saw." "I see everything," he said, "and I know her tactics. She's ambitious, and she doesn't like competition." "I'm not her competition," Savannah said quickly. His eyes held hers, steady, unreadable. "Aren't you?" Her breath caught, words tangling in her throat. Before she could respond, the sound of laughter drifted from inside, pulling them back to reality. Ethan straightened, composure snapping back into place. "We should go. The car is waiting." The ride back was quieter than the ride there. Savannah stared out at the city lights, her thoughts tangled. She should have felt triumphant. She'd survived the gala, earned Ethan's praise, even danced in his arms. But Victoria's words lingered, like a thorn beneath her skin. At headquarters, the car pulled into the private garage. Ethan stepped out first, then turned to offer his hand. She hesitated for only a heartbeat before taking it, the contact sending a jolt through her. "Good work tonight," he said, his voice low. "Get some rest. Monday will be worse." She laughed softly, nerves easing. "I'll be ready." His eyes lingered on her, for a moment longer than necessary. Then he nodded, releasing her hand. Savannah walked toward the elevators, the click of her borrowed heels echoing in the cavernous garage. She didn't dare look back, but she felt his gaze on her until the doors closed, upstairs in her tiny apartment. She peeled off the gown and jewelry, slipping into worn pajamas. The borrowed diamonds had been returned, the makeup washed away, the magic stripped down to plain reality. Yet when she glanced in the mirror, the girl staring back didn't look entirely the same. She was still Savannah Miller, intern, scholarship kid from Queens. But tonight, she had stepped into a ballroom full of gods, and not only survived, she had been noticed. She touched the pendant at her throat, the memory of Ethan's jacket heavy on her shoulders. For the first time since starting at Black Couture, Savannah didn't feel invisible, and for Ethan Black, though he would never admit it aloud, the image of Savannah in midnight blue, eyes bright, laughter soft in his ear, lingered long after the gala ended. Far across town, in her penthouse suite, Victoria poured herself a final glass of champagne. The night hadn't gone as she planned. Ethan's attention had strayed, not to the investors or editors she lined up, but to the intern who didn't belong. Victoria's lips curved into a smile, sharp and certain. "So," she murmured, swirling the glass. "Game on." The city glittered outside her window, full of possibility, full of danger. And as Savannah drifted to sleep in her modest apartment, she had no idea that the true battle had only just begun. Monday morning at Black Couture was a battlefield disguised as a workspace. Designers sprinted across the studio carrying fabric swatches, assistants barked into phones, and interns balanced garment bags while weaving between dress forms. The gala was barely over, but already the company's focus had shifted to the next mountain, the upcoming fall-winter collection. Savannah arrived early, clutching her sketchbook like a shield. She still hadn't come down from the whirlwind of Friday night. The memory of chandeliers, champagne, and Ethan's hand at her waist lingered like a dream. But she reminded herself, it wasn't a fairy tale. It was work, and she had work to do. Her desk was already stacked with assignments when she arrived. Inventory lists, call sheets, a dozen tasks that screamed intern. She slid into her chair, ready to lose herself in the routine, when a shadow fell across her. Savannah Miller. She looked up, startled. Ethan stood there, sharp as ever, in a tailored charcoal suit. A hush seemed to ripple through the nearby interns, their heads snapping up to watch. Ethan rarely addressed interns directly. "Yes, Mr. Black," she managed, trying to keep her voice even. "Conference room. 10 minutes. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and strode away. Savannah's pulse spiked. Conference room. with Ethan Black. She stuffed her sketchbook into her bag and hurried after him. The conference room was vast, its walls lined with inspiration boards, photographs, and fabric swatches pinned like constellations. Ethan stood at the head of the table, reviewing a stack of files. Victoria was already there, perched elegantly in a cream blazer, lips curved in a knowing smile. "Sit," Ethan instructed. Without looking up, Savannah slid into a chair, her palms damp. Ethan finally set down the files. His gaze swept between the two women. The fall-winter collection is behind schedule. Too many recycled ideas. Investors expect innovation, not repetition. I want something new, something bold, and I want it fast. Victoria leaned forward, confidence radiating. "I've already started compiling trends, Ethan. I can have a draft mood board ready by tomorrow." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not asking for trends. I want vision. Trends are for followers." His eyes shifted to Savannah. "Which is why I'm giving you the assignment." The air left Savannah's lungs. "Me, you," Ethan said firmly. 1 week. A concept board and preliminary sketches for the collection. Surprise me." Victoria's smile faltered, though only for a second. "Ethan, with all due respects, Fana is still an intern. She doesn't have the experience for something this critical." Ethan's gaze hardened. "Experience doesn't guarantee originality. Sometimes it's the outsider who sees what the insiders can't." Savannah's throat went dry. She wanted to protest, to say she wasn't ready, but Ethan's eyes pinned her in place. There was no room for refusal. "Yes, sir," she whispered. The week that followed was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. Savannah spent every waking hour sketching, erasing, redrawing. She haunted fabric suppliers, ran her hands over silks and wools, searched for textures that told a story. She pulled inspiration from the city itself, steel and glass towers, graffiti on subway walls, the sharp edge of neon against midnight skies. Her tiny apartment became a war zone of sketches, fabric scraps, and empty coffee cups. She forgot to eat, forgot to sleep. But slowly, something emerged, a collection that fused structure with vulnerability, strength with softness. On Friday night, she taped her sketches to the wall and stepped back, her heart pounding. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. She imagined Ethan's reaction, his cool gray eyes softening with approval. Then she shoved the thought away. This wasn't about him. This was about proving she belonged. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Savannah carried her sketchbook into the office, nerves rattling like glass. She'd barely slept, but adrenaline kept her upright as she walked down the corridor. Victoria's voice drifted from around the corner. Ridiculous, honestly. An intern handling something this important. Ethan's standards must be slipping. Laughter followed, sharp and cruel. Savannah clenched her jaw and kept walking. She wouldn't let Victoria get to her. Not today. When she reached her desk, she carefully placed her sketchbook inside the drawer, locking it before heading to the fabric library. She didn't notice the way Victoria's gaze followed her from across the room, sharp and calculating. That afternoon, Savannah returned to her desk, ready to refine her presentation. But when she opened her drawer, her heart stopped. The sketchbook was gone. Panic surged through her. She tore through her bag, the desk, even the trash bin, but it was nowhere. Her chest constricted, breath coming short. Those sketches were everything, weeks of work, her entire vision. Looking for something, she spun. Victoria stood nearby, sipping her latte, expression smooth as silk. Savannah's stomach dropped. "Where is it?" Victoria arched a brow. "I have no idea what you mean." Before Savannah could reply, Ethan's assistant appeared. "Mr. Black wants you both in the boardroom." "Now?" Savannah's heart pounded as she followed Victoria down the hall. Whatever was waiting inside, she had a sinking feeling it wasn't going to be good. The boardroom buzzed with energy. Executives, designers, and investors filled the seats, eyes sharp with expectation. Ethan sat at the head of the table, his presence magnetic, a storm contained. "Today," he said, "we reviewed the initial concepts for fall, winter." Victoria rose gracefully, a stack of papers in hand. "If I may begin." Ethan gestured for her to proceed. As Victoria unveiled her mood board and sketches, Savannah's blood ran cold. The lines, the textures, the color palette, it was hers. Every detail ripped straight from her stolen sketchbook. Whispers spread around the room. "Brilliant," one executive murmured. "Fresh, bold." Victoria smiled sweetly. "Of course, these are still rough ideas, but I believe this direction could redefine our identity this season." Savannah's hands shook beneath the table. Rage, betrayal, panic, they tangled in her chest until she could barely breathe. She wanted to shout, to accuse, but her voice lodged in her throat. Then Victoria added, ever so casually, "I should also note Ty found some very similar sketches left carelessly in the intern area. It seems someone's been borrowing ideas, but I assure you, this concept is mine." Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes shifted to Savannah. Her cheeks burned, humiliation flooding her veins. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. And then, across the table, she met Ethan's eyes. His gaze didn't waver. It didn't accuse. It was steady, strong, full of something she hadn't expected. Belief. Savannah's lungs filled again. Her hands steadied. For the first time that day, she felt the ground beneath her feet. She rose slowly, her voice clear. "With all due respect, I'd like to present my work as well." The room stilled. Ethan leaned back in his chair, lips curving ever so slightly. "Proceed." The boardroom had gone eerily quiet, like the air before a thunderclap. All eyes were on Savannah, some curious, others skeptical, and a few downright judgmental. She felt the weight of their gazes pressing into her skin, threatening to smother the words before they could escape. But then there was Ethan. He didn't look away, didn't frown, didn't cut her down with a single sharp comment, as she half expected. His eyes stayed on hers, steady as stone, as though silently daring her to fold or daring her to rise. Savannah inhaled, straightened her shoulders, and faced the room. "I'd like to present my concept," she repeated, her voice clear now, though her heart hammered so loudly she wondered if anyone else could hear it. Victoria's smile froze, a hairline crack forming beneath her mask of composure. "Ethan, really," she said smoothly. "Do we have time for this? The board's schedule is already packed." "We have time," Ethan replied flatly. His gaze flicked to Savannah again. "Go ahead." A ripple moved through the room. The projector screen glowed as Savannah pulled a small USB drive from her bag, her backup. She had spent nights saving digital copies, just in case. She thanked every instinct that had whispered to her to prepare. The first image filled the screen, a collage of cities, steel skyscrapers, neon reflections on wet pavement, graffiti bursts of color. "This," Savannah began, her voice steadying with every word, "is New York at night. It's raw, it's restless, it's alive. That's the energy I wanted to capture." She clicked to the next slide, a sketch of a coat, sharp-shouldered with sweeping lines, paired with boots that looked built for power. The collection is called Urban Pulse. It blends structure with movement, strength with vulnerability. These silhouettes draw from architecture strong lines, defined edges, while fabrics soften them, making each piece wearable, intimate. A low murmur of interest spread. Savannah's confidence grew. She gestured toward a dress that shimmered with iridescent panels. "Here, the reflective fabric mimics city lights. It changes with movement, just like the city itself. Nothing static, nothing predictable." She moved slide by slide, sketch by sketch, explaining her choices with precision. Color palettes rooted in midnight blues, storm grays, and bursts of crimson. Patterns inspired by subway tiles, Graffiti curves translated into embroidery. Every detail had intention, every decision a reason. The room leaned in. Even the most stoic executives scribbled notes. Victoria's nails tapped against the table, faster, sharper. Her smile had vanished. One investor cleared his throat. "Miss Miller, these designs are, they truly your own?" Savannah met his gaze head-on. "Yes, every line, every swatch, every word. I lived these streets. I studied them, sketched them, dreamed them. This city raised me, and this collection is my voice." Her words rang with conviction, silencing the doubt. Another executive nodded slowly. "It feels authentic, not manufactured. Fresh, yes," someone else agreed. "It's contemporary, but still wearable. A balance we've been missing." Savannah's chest swelled, relief washing through her. She had done. It turned the whispers into praise. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but his eyes glinted with something rare, approval. When Savannah finished, applause didn't erupt. It wasn't that kind of room. But the nods, the murmurs, the shifting energy told her enough. She had been heard. Ethan's voice cut through the chatter. "Thank you, Miss Miller." Savannah dipped her head. "Thank you, Mr. Black." Victoria couldn't stay silent any longer. "This is absurd," she snapped, her mask finally cracking. "Anyone can string together buzzwords about the city. Inspiration doesn't prove originality. How do we know she didn't copy my work?" The room tensed. Savannah's pulse stuttered, but she didn't back down. "Because I can explain every choice, every detail. Ask me about the fabrics, the cuts, the intended markets. I know them all. Can you say the same?" Gasps rippled through the boardroom. A few heads turned toward Victoria. Her mouth opened, then closed, her composure faltering for the first time. Ethan's gaze pinned her, cold as steel. "Enough." His voice was low, commanding. This meeting was about innovation, and tonight, we saw it. Miss Miller's vision will move forward into development. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, fury blazing in her eyes. But she said nothing more. After the meeting, the boardroom emptied quickly, chatter buzzing in the hallways about the intern who had stood her ground. Savannah lingered, gathering her things with trembling hands. Her body felt like a wire pulled too tight, ready to snap. "You did well?" She looked up. Ethan stood across the table, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said softly, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "You defended yourself with facts, not emotion. That's what matters in this business." His praise was measured, but it landed like sunlight on frozen ground. Savannah exhaled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Still," Ethan added, his gaze sharp, "be careful. The higher you rise, the more enemies you make, and Victoria Lane does not forgive easily." Savannah nodded, her stomach tightening. She knew it was true. Ethan lingered another moment, then straightened his cuffs. "Keep working on Urban Pulse. I expect a full presentation by the end of the month. Yes, Mr. Black?" As he turned to leave, Savannah caught the faintest trace of something in his eyes, not just approval, but something heavier, something that made her heart stumble. When the door shut behind him, she pressed her palms to the table, steadying herself. She had survived. More than survived. She had proved herself. But the war with Victoria was only beginning. That evening, Savannah sat at her tiny kitchen table, a half-eaten sandwich pushed aside as she stared at her laptop. Articles were already popping up online, rumors leaking from the meeting. Black Couture's new direction, headlines read. Fresh perspective from an unlikely source. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of the other interns. "Girl, you're trending in the office chat. Everyone's talking about your showdown with Victoria." Savannah groaned, burying her face in her hands. She hadn't wanted a showdown. She just wanted to do her job. But deep down, a flicker of pride warmed her. She thought of Ethan's words, "You did well." The way he'd looked at her, steady, unwavering. For the first time since starting at Black Couture, Savannah allowed herself to believe she might belong taught far across town. Victoria stood before her vanity, ripping pins from her perfect bun. Her reflection glared back at her, lips painted like blood. She replayed the boardroom in her mind, the moment Ethan had chosen Savannah over her, an intern, and nobody. Her nails dug into her palms. "No," she whispered, venom in her tone. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The city outside glittered, unaware, but Victoria Lane was already plotting her next move. The week after the boardroom battle was the most intense of Savannah's life. Every day, she arrived at the studio before sunrise, armed with fabric swatches and a stack of refined sketches. The design team eyed her differently now, some with curiosity, some with admiration, and a few with thinly veiled resentment. But no one ignored her anymore. She was no longer just the coffee girl. She was the intern with a collection on the line. Savannah threw herself into the work, refining silhouettes, experimenting with textiles, and pinning prototypes to dress forms. She stayed late into the night, her pencil smudges staining her fingertips, her voice hoarse from explaining cuts and seams to pattern makers. Exhaustion gnawed at her, but so did exhilaration. Still, doubt lingered. Was she really good enough to carry a collection? Could she live up to Ethan's expectations, or worse, to her own? One evening, as she wrestled with a stubborn sketch, she heard footsteps. Ethan stepped into the studio, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled to his forearms. "You're still here," he said. Savannah startled, clutching her sketchbook. "Ah yes, just working through some adjustments." He studied the dress form behind her, where a half-finished coat hung. The lines were sharp, architectural, but the drape of the fabric softened them. "You're combining contradictions," he observed. "Strength and fluidity." She blinked. "Exactly. That's the point." His mouth curved slightly. "Then keep going. Don't second-guess it." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you really think it's good enough?" Ethan's gaze held hers, unwavering. "If I didn't, we wouldn't be here." Heat rushed to her cheeks, and she quickly looked away, pretending to adjust a pin. But his words settled deep inside her, steadying the storm of doubt. By Friday, prototypes of 3 key looks were ready for internal review. Savannah presented them to a small group of senior staff. The tension was suffocating, every eye on her, every detail scrutinized. "This coat," she explained, gesturing to the first piece, "draws from the rigid lines of skyscrapers. The material is wool, with a hint of stretch, to balance structure with comfort." The room hummed with nods and murmurs. "Encouraging. Next." She unveiled the reflective dress, its panels catching the studio lights like city windows. Gasps broke out. "In motion," Savannah continued. "The dress changes with perspective. It reflects light differently depending on angle, just as the city looks different from block to block, moment to moment." By the time she finished, even the toughest critics were leaning forward. Ethan, seated at the back, said nothing throughout. But when the meeting ended, his eyes found hers. One small nod. That was enough. Savannah's name began to spread beyond the office. Whispers floated in fashion circles, the intern shaking up Black Couture. Journalists sniffed around, hungry for stories. A blog even ran a speculative piece, "Urban Pulse, the next big thing." Savannah read it late one night, curled on her couch, half thrilled and half terrified. Fame wasn't her goal, but if the collection succeeded, it could change everything. Not everyone was pleased. Victoria watched from the sidelines, her envy sharpening into fury. For years, she had clawed her way up, aligning herself with power, molding herself into what Ethan valued, efficient, poised, untouchable. And now, a girl from Queens threatened to unravel it all. Victoria poured herself another glass of wine in her penthouse. Scrolling through the glowing coverage, Savannah was beginning to attract Her reflection in the glass was cold, her lips a thin line. "No," she whispered. "You don't get to take what I've earned." Her mind raced. If Ethan wouldn't see reason, she would make sure Savannah fell, publicly, permanently. Back at the studio, Savannah began to notice subtle shifts. A missing fabric swatch here, a misplaced pattern there. Small things, but enough to slow her down. She dismissed them at first as normal chaos in a busy studio, but a sliver of unease grew. Then one afternoon, she overheard two assistants whispering near the elevator. "Victoria's not done. She's planning something big, right before the showcase." Savannah's stomach dropped. She didn't hear the rest before the assistants walked off, but the warning lodged in her chest. That night, Ethan called her into his office. The skyline glittered behind him, casting him in silver light. "You're ahead of schedule," he said, scanning her progress reports. "The prototypes are strong. Investors are already interested." "That's good," Savannah said carefully. He looked up, sensing her hesitation. "Something's wrong." She hesitated, then admitted, "It's just, I think Victoria might be trying to undermine me. Little things keep going missing." And I overheard Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'll handle Victoria." Savannah blinked. "I didn't mean for you to." His voice was sharp. "You focus on the work. That's your job. Protecting you from distraction is mine." The firmness in his tone left no room for argument. Yet beneath it, Savannah caught something else, a flicker of concern. Not just professional, but personal. She swallowed. "Thank you." For a moment, the office felt too small, the silence between them too charged. Then Ethan returned to his files, the conversation over. But as Savannah left, her heart thudded with a new awareness. He was watching out for her, not as an intern, not as a subordinate, as something more. Weeks passed, in a blur of fabric and deadlines. The showcase loomed, the collection taking shape piece by piece. Savannah poured her soul into every detail, her vision sharpening like a blade. But beneath the excitement, tension hummed. Victoria's presence lingered like a shadow, her eyes sharp, her smile sharper. She said little, but Savannah could feel the storm gathering, and she was right, because 3 months later, on the eve of the collection's debut, disaster struck in the studio's final frenzy. As seamstresses sewed hems and models were fitted for rehearsals, Savannah checked the finishing touches on the show's pièce de résistance, the finale gown, midnight silk, embroidered with metallic threads. It was the heart of Urban Pulse. She stepped away for just a moment, long enough to fetch a different zipper. When she returned, her blood froze. The gown was slashed. A long, jagged tear cut through the fabric, deliberate, devastating, and standing nearby, feigning horror, was Victoria's open pair of scissors dangling from her hand. "Oh no," Victoria gasped, her voice syrup-sweet. "How clumsy of me. I was only reaching for the pins." Savannah's world tilted. Rage, panic, despair all threatened to drown her. The show was tomorrow. This gown was everything. But then she remembered Ethan's words. "Don't second guess. Keep going." She squared her shoulders, her voice steel. "It's not ruined. I can fix it." Victoria's brows lifted, mocking. "Really? In less than 24 hours?" Savannah met her gaze, unflinching. "Watch me." That night, the studio became her battleground. She ripped seams, recut panels, stitched until her fingers bled. The clock ticked mercilessly, but Savannah refused to surrender. By dawn, a new gown hung on the formed front, but stronger. The tear had forced her to innovate, to reshape, to push past her limits. The result was bolder, fiercer, more alive than the original. Savannah collapsed into a chair, exhausted, her eyes stinging with tears. But when she looked at the gown, she knew this was the collection's true heart. And tomorrow, when the world watched, she would not only survive Victoria's sabotage, she would triumph. The office of Black Couture never really slept, even after the designers and assistants had gone home. The 26th floor hummed with low light, computers glowing like watchful eyes, half-finished gowns draped across mannequins in eerie silence. It was nearly midnight when Savannah leaned over her desk, sketching lines that blurred from exhaustion. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, her hand cramping from holding the pencil too tightly. But she refused to stop. Inspiration came in fleeting bursts, and if she didn't catch it, she feared it would vanish. She didn't notice the door click until footsteps echoed across the quiet studio. She looked up and froze. Ethan. He wasn't in his usual suit jacket. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled up, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked human, almost weary, though his eyes still carried that razor-sharp intensity. "You're still here," he said, voice low, carrying across the quiet. Savannah scrambled to sit straighter. I was just finishing up some revisions." His gaze flicked to the mess of sketches, swatches, and notes scattered across her desk. Revisions, or reinvention. She blinked, unsure if it was a compliment or criticism. Both, maybe. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped closer, sliding one sketch free from the pile. His brows furrowed as he studied it, a long coat with bold shoulders but a singed waist, detailed embroidery along the hem like graffiti turned into lace. "You're merging structure with chaos," he murmured, her throat tightened. That was the idea. New York's like that, strong and fragile, polished and broken. I wanted to show both. He set the sketch down carefully, almost reverently. "Most interns would give me something safe, something they know I'll approve of. You didn't." Savannah swallowed. "Is that bad?" Ethan's gaze cut to hers, sharp and unwavering. "It's the only reason you're still here." The words hit her like a physical jolt. Approval from Ethan Black was rare, nearly mythical. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, quickly ducking her head to hide it. He circled her desk, scanning the rest of her work. "You're not just talented, Savannah. You're stubborn. You work until your hands shake. Most people quit before midnight. You don't." She managed a faint smile. "I guess I don't know how to stop." Something flickered across his face, an emotion she couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe, or something deeper. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was comfortable. Then his phone buzzed, shattering it. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening again. "The board is demanding progress reports. Investors are restless. This collection has to land." "I know," Savannah said softly. "That's why I'm still here." Their eyes met again, and this time, Ethan didn't look away. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern repeated. Savannah would stay late, and more often than not, Ethan would appear hours after everyone else had left. Sometimes he asked questions, testing her reasoning. Other times he just watched silently, as though her sketches answered questions he couldn't put into words. One night, she dared to ask him, "Do you ever sleep?" His lips curved faintly. "Not much. Because of work. Because of everything." She wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of the man behind the CEO mask, but his walls were thick, built brick by brick from years of discipline. Still, every now and then, she caught glimpses, a flash of weariness in his eyes, the shadow of loneliness in his voice, and slowly, carefully, her fear of him began to shift into something else. Word of Savannah's growing role spread quietly through the office. Some whispered admiration, others bitterness. She caught snippets in hallways. "She's the one Ethan stays late with, or she's not just an intern anymore." It unsettled her. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, but she couldn't deny what was happening. Ethan trusted her. He sought her out, and though he never said it outright, his actions spoke loudly. One night, as they stood over a rack of fabric swatches, Savannah dared to tease, "You know, people are starting to think we're working on a secret project." His brow arched. Aren't we? She laughed softly, shaking her head. You make it sound like espionage. In this industry, Ethan replied, his tone dry but his eyes glinting. It might as well be. For the first time, Savannah let herself laugh freely around him. And for the first time, Ethan let the sound linger without shutting it down. Victoria, of course, noticed. She always noticed. From her glass-walled office. She watched the way Ethan lingered longer near Savannah's desk. The way his expression softened just barely when she spoke. Victoria's jaw tightened. She had spent years positioning herself at Ethan's side, cultivating loyalty, proving her worth. And now, this girl, this nobody was chipping away at everything. Victoria's manicured nails tapped against her desk. If Savannah thought she could steal the spotlight, she was gravely mistaken. By the end of the month, Savannah's name was no longer whispered in passing. It was spoken aloud in meetings. Ethan introduced her ideas without hesitation, credited her openly. When investors raised questions, he deferred to her answers. It was subtle, but undeniable. She wasn't just an intern anymore, and Savannah felt it, too. Not just the recognition, but the shift between them. Every late-night sketch, every shared silence, every moment their eyes locked across the studio, it was building into something fragile, dangerous, and irresistible. Neither of them named it, but both of them knew. The email came late on a Wednesday afternoon. Subject, Chicago trip, Friday. From Ethan Black to Savannah Miller. Savannah blinked at the screen. She read it again, sure she was misinterpreting. But no, the message was short, direct, and unmistakable. You'll accompany me to the client pitch in Chicago. Flight departs Friday, 8 a.m. Car will pick you up at 6:45. Her stomach swooped. She had never been on a business trip before, certainly not with Ethan. By the time Friday arrived, she'd barely slept. At dawn, she stood outside her apartment in a neat blazer and heels that pinched, clutching her carry-on like a lifeline. The sleek black town car pulled up, and Ethan stepped out, perfectly pressed, despite the early hour. "Morning," he said curtly, opening the door for her. "Good morning," she managed, sliding inside. The ride to the airport was quiet. Ethan tapped at his tablet, reviewing presentations. Savannah rehearsed her notes in her head, determined not to embarrass herself. But when they boarded the private jet's sleek leather seats, polished wood paneling, her nerves spiked again. She sank into her seat, overwhelmed by the luxury. "First time on one of these?" Ethan asked, glancing up from his tablet. She flushed. "Is it that obvious? Most people stare at the ceiling the first time," he said, a faint smirk tugging at his mouth. Savannah laughed softly, tension easing. "It feels like another world." "It is," Ethan replied, his tone unreadable. "But it doesn't mean you don't belong in it." Her heart skipped. She wondered if he knew what his words meant to her. 2 hours later, Chicago's skyline loomed through the window. The city was brisk, its wind slicing through her coat as they stepped into the car waiting on the tarmac. Ethan didn't flinch, but Savannah shivered. Without a word, he shrugged out of his overcoat and draped it over her shoulders. "You'll freeze otherwise," he said simply. She clutched the coat tighter, the faint scent of his cologne surrounding her. "Thank you." The meeting itself was grueling. A room full of executives from one of the largest retail chains in the Midwest. Ethan commanded the conversation effortlessly, his voice calm and precise, his presence magnetic. Savannah sat beside him, taking notes, offering occasional input when asked. To her surprise, he deferred to her more than once. "Savannah, show them the material breakdown," he said at one point. She nearly dropped her pen, but recovered quickly, sliding the swatches across the table. "We've sourced textiles that balance sustainability with durability," she explained, steadying her voice. "Each piece is designed to last beyond a single season." The executives nodded, impressed. Later, during a break, Ethan leaned close, his voice low. Good. You spoke with authority. She blinked. I was terrified. Then they didn't see it. That's what matters. The warmth of his praise carried her through the rest of the meeting. By evening, exhaustion settled into her bones. The pitch had gone well, but she was drained. At the hotel, she expected Ethan to retreat to his suite and disappear behind a wall of emails. Instead, he surprised her. Dinner, he asked, loosening his tie. She hesitated. With you. His brow arched. Unless you have other plans in Chicago. No, she said quickly, cheeks warming. Dinner would be great. They ended up in a quiet restaurant near the river, a far cry from the glittering galas she'd seen him attend. The lighting was soft, the tables intimate, the menu simple. Ethan ordered a steak. Savannah chose pasta. For the first time, they weren't CEO and intern. They were just two people sharing a meal. He asked about her family, her childhood in Queens. She told him about her mother working double shifts, about sketching designs on the backs of grocery receipts, because notebooks were too expensive. You've been designing your whole life, he said, not as a question, but a realization. She nodded, twirling her fork. I never thought I'd end up here though. Black Couture felt untouchable. Ethan studied her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. Nothing is untouchable if you're willing to bleed for it. She looked at him then, really looked. Beneath the sharp suits and cold commands, he was a man who had bled, too. She wondered what wounds he carried, what it cost him to build his empire. The silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was full, charged, almost fragile. When the waiter arrived with dessert menus, Ethan shook his head. No dessert. We've got an early flight. But Savannah smiled. Just coffee for me, please. Ethan's lips twitched. Of course. Back at the hotel, they rode the elevator in silence. The hum of the city outside, muffled by thick glass. When the doors opened on her floor, Savannah turned, clutching his coat still draped over her shoulders. Thank you, she said softly. For today. For everything. Ethan's eyes lingered on her, unreadable in the dim light. Get some rest, Savannah. Tomorrow, we go back to the battlefield. She nodded, stepping out. But as the doors closed, her heart pounded. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. The next morning, on the flight back to New York, Savannah dozed against the window. When she stirred awake, she found Ethan watching her, his expression unreadable. Sorry, she murmured. Embarrassed. You needed it, he said simply, returning to his tablet, but his voice was softer than usual. And though he didn't look at her again, she felt the weight of his gaze long after. Back at the office, whispers bloomed immediately. They went to Chicago together. Why her? Something's going on. Savannah ignored them, burying herself in sketches, but inside, she couldn't deny it anymore. She was beginning to see Ethan differently. Not just as a CEO, not just as the man who pushed her to the edge, but as someone who, in rare moments, let her glimpse the man beneath the armor. And that glimpse was enough to make her heart tremble. Far across the office, Victoria seethed. She had watched Ethan and Savannah leave together for Chicago. She had seen the way he returned with a new gleam in his eyes, subtle but unmistakable. Her nails dug into her palms until the skin whitened. No, she wouldn't let this happen. If Savannah thought she could steal Ethan's attention, she was about to learn just how ruthless Victoria Lane could be. The fashion hall buzzed like a hive on the morning of the preview show. It wasn't the grand showcase that would come months later, but a private industry event designed to test the waters. Buyers, select editors, and a handful of investors filled the rows, their pens poised, eyes sharp. Backstage was chaos. Models lined up half-dressed, makeup artists sprinted between stations, and assistants barked orders over the din. Savannah wove through the madness with her clipboard, checking off looks, tugging zippers, and smoothing hems. Every nerve in her body sang with tension. This was her trial by fire. Savannah. One of the seamstresses called. Look 3 needs adjustment. The hem's too long. She rushed over, kneeling to pin the dress as the model fidgeted impatiently. Sweat beaded at her temples, but her hands stayed steady. When she rose, Victoria was there, impeccable in a tailored blazer, her smile sharp. Quite the responsibility you've taken on, Victoria purred. Ethan must really trust you. Brave of him. Savannah forced a polite smile. It's not about bravery. It's about work. Victoria leaned in, her whisper venomous. Then let's see if your work holds up under pressure. Before Savannah could respond, the stage manager shouted, Places. First look in 2 minutes. The models lined up, and the show began. The first few looks flowed smoothly. The music pulsed, lights flashing as models strutted down the runway in Savannah's designs. She watched from the wings, heart pounding as murmurs rippled through the audience. They're fresh, one editor whispered. Unexpected. Another added. Hope sparked in Savannah's chest. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. Then disaster struck. As the 5th model stepped forward, Savannah's eyes caught on a glaring problem. The belt was missing. It wasn't just an accessory. It anchored the entire silhouette. Without it, the dress sagged. Incomplete. Her stomach dropped. She knew she had checked it earlier. Victoria. Panic threatened to drown her, but Savannah snapped into motion. She grabbed a spare belt from the rack, sprinted to intercept the next model, and buckled it around her waist seconds before she hit the runway. Crisis. Averted but barely. Her pulse thundered as she returned to her station, only to find Victoria watching her, lips curved in a mocking smile. Careless, Victoria murmured. You should be more organized. Savannah clenched her fists but said nothing. She couldn't afford to lose focus. The show pressed on. Look after look swept the runway, each one carrying a piece of her vision. The audience leaned forward, scribbling notes, snapping photos. But Victoria wasn't done. Halfway through, Savannah caught a flash of movement. Victoria, accidentally knocking a tray of accessories to the floor. Bracelets clattered, earrings scattered. Savannah lunged, scooping them up, fastening them back onto models in a blur of speed. The models hit the runway in time. The audience never noticed, but Savannah did, and so did Ethan. He had been standing at the edge of the backstage chaos, silent and watchful, his sharp eyes missing nothing. When Savannah glanced up after saving the look, their gazes locked. He gave the barest nod, subtle but electric. He had seen. By the finale, Savannah was shaking with exhaustion, but the last model swept onto the runway flawlessly dressed. The music crashed into its climax, the audience erupting into applause. Backstage, the team exhaled in unison. Assistants hugged, seamstresses high-fived. Savannah sagged against the wall, adrenaline fading, relief crashing through her. Then Ethan appeared. He stepped into the center of the chaos, his presence commanding silence. Good work, he said to the team, his voice carrying over the din. The show was a success. The staff murmured thanks, glowing under his rare praise. Then, deliberately, he turned to Savannah, and it was Savannah Miller who kept it from falling apart. Every problem that could have ruined this show, she solved. The room froze. Dozens of eyes swung to Savannah. Whispers rose, admiration mixed with surprise. Savannah's cheeks flamed. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Ethan's gaze swept the staff, hardening. Let it be clear, her work speaks for itself, and anyone who tries to undermine it undermines me. His words landed like thunder. Everyone knew exactly who they were meant for. Victoria's face tightened, her smile brittle as glass. She said nothing, but the fury in her eyes burned. Savannah's chest constricted, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Ethan hadn't just defended her privately, He had staked his reputation on hers. Publicly, the team dispersed, buzzing with excitement. But Savannah stood frozen until Ethan approached, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You held the show together," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She managed a whisper. "Thank you." His gaze lingered, steady and unreadable. Then, softer, "Get some rest, Savannah. You've earned it." He turned and walked away, leaving her breathless. That night, Savannah lay awake in her apartment, replaying every moment. The applause, the adrenaline, the way Ethan had looked at her when he defended her in front of everyone. Her heart pounded at the memory. She knew what it meant. He trusted her. He respected her, and maybe, just maybe, something more far across the city. Victoria poured herself a glass of wine with shaking hands. She replayed Ethan's words, his open defense of Savannah. Her reflection in the glass was pale, furious. Savannah Miller had won this round. But Victoria Lane never lost for long. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she whispered into the empty room. The city glittered outside her window, oblivious to the storm still brewing. The days leading up to the Urban Pulse showcase blurred into a relentless storm. Savannah lived in the design studio, surrounded by fabric bolts and sketchpads, subsisting on coffee and adrenaline. Every seam mattered. Every stitch could be the difference between triumph and humiliation. The collection was hers, her fingerprints on every silhouette, every daring cut, every bold use of color. But it wasn't just about clothes anymore. It was about proving she belonged in this world, proving Ethan's faith in her hadn't been misplaced, proving, most of all, that she wasn't the girl Victoria whispered about in boardroom corners, too naive, too green, too temporary. She would show them all. Still, the weight of it nearly crushed her at midnight, alone under the glow of a desk lamp. Savannah stared at the final sketch pinned to the wall, the closing gown. It was a masterpiece in her mind, structured yet fluid, sharp lines melting into sweeping fabric, metallic threads catching light with every step. It was meant to embody the heartbeat of the city, the rhythm of Urban Pulse. But it also terrified her, because if anything went wrong, if distress failed, the entire collection would unravel. Her phone buzzed. She startled, expecting another urgent text from the production team. Instead, it was a simple message. "Ethan, don't forget to breathe." She stared at the words, her throat tightening. She hadn't realized until that moment that she'd been holding her breath for days. She typed back, hesitated, then erased it. In the end, she simply pocketed the phone and got back to work. But the warmth of his reminder lingered. The next morning, the studio buzzed with frantic energy. Assistants darted between racks, makeup artists rehearsed looks on models, and stylists adjusted shoes and accessories. Victoria swept into the chaos like she owned it. Her heels clicked against the polished floor. Her red lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, surveying the scene, "how charmingly amateur." Savannah didn't rise to the bait. She was bent over a sewing machine, reinforcing a hem. Her focus was armored out. Victoria drifted closer, her perfume cloying. "You've worked hard, I'll give you that, but pressure does interesting things to people. Let's hope you don't crumble." Savannah kept her voice calm. "Thanks for the concern, Victoria, but I don't plan on crumbling." Victoria's smile sharpened. "We'll see." She turned on her heel and strode away. But Savannah felt the chill long after she left. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived. His presence was like a thunderclap. Every head turned, every conversation faltered. He walked the room with his usual composure, dark suit immaculate, eyes sharp. But when his gaze found Savannah, it softened almost imperceptibly. "How are we looking?" he asked, stopping beside her workstation. "Tired," she admitted, "but strong. Good." He studied the gown sketch pinned to the board. "That's the finale." She nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "Yes, It's everything. He said nothing for a moment. Then, don't overthink it. You already have the vision. Just trust yourself. The words shouldn't have meant so much, but they did. She felt steadier, as if his belief anchored her own. As he turned to leave, he leaned closer, so only she could hear. Ignore the noise. The only voice that matters is yours. Savannah swallowed hard, forcing herself not to tremble. Yes, Mr. Black. But when he walked away, her heart was anything but steady. The days bled into nights. Fittings ran until dawn. Fabric scraps littered the floor like confetti. Savannah hardly ate, hardly slept. Her body ached, but she pushed through. Victoria, meanwhile, hovered at the edges, always watching, always smiling that knowing smile. Once, Savannah caught her rifling through accessory trays, pretending to help. Another time, she noticed Victoria whispering to a seamstress, who flushed and scurried away. It was subtle, so subtle no one else seemed to notice. But Savannah felt the prickle of unease. Victoria was planning something. She just didn't know what. 2 nights before the show, the team gathered in the empty venue for rehearsal. The cavernous hall echoed with footsteps as models practiced their walks under harsh lights. Savannah stood at the edge of the runway, clipboard in hand, calling out adjustments. Pace, Marissa's slower on the turn. Tasha, watch the hem. It's catching on your shoes. Ethan watched from the back of the hall, arms folded. He looked every bit the commanding CEO, but when Savannah caught his eye, he gave a small nod. Approval had fueled her through the long night. When rehearsal ended, most of the team stumbled out, exhausted. Savannah lingered, checking the finale gown one more time. She smoothed the fabric, whispering to it like a prayer. "You'll shine," she murmured. "You have to." Behind her, Victoria's voice cut through the silence. "Talking to dressies now. How quaint." Savannah stiffened. "Shouldn't you be resting? Big night ahead." Victoria circled the gown like a predator. "Oh, I'll be ready. The question is, will you?" Their eyes met. For the first time, Savannah didn't flinch. "Yes," she said firmly. "I will." Victoria's smile was slow, serpentine. "We'll see." She disappeared into the shadows, leaving Savannah alone with the gown and the echo of her words. The night before the show, the city seemed to hold its breath. The venue was locked, security doubled. Savannah walked home through the glowing streets, exhaustion dragging at her bones. She thought of Ethan, of the way he'd defended her at the last preview show, of the quiet encouragements he slipped her when no one else could hear. She thought of Victoria, too, and the threat simmering beneath her every word. Tomorrow, it would all come to a head. Savannah lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, heart racing. She knew the stakes. She knew the risks, but she also knew this. She had given everything she had, and no matter what happened, she would walk into that venue tomorrow, ready to fight. For her designs, for her place, for herself, and maybe, just maybe, for something more. The night of the Urban Pulse showcase arrived like a thunderstorm. The venue glittered with chandeliers and glass, the runway gleaming under rows of lights. Celebrities, buyers, editors, and investors filled the front row, their laughter and camera flashes mingling into a dizzying hum. Social media influencers live-streamed their every step, the hashtags already trending before the first model even set foot on the stage. Backstage, the chaos was suffocating. Assistants scurried, models wriggled into dresses, makeup brushes swept over cheeks with frantic speed, and at the center of it all stood Savannah, clipboard clutched to her chest, eyes darting from rack to rack. She had checked every gown, every shoe, every last piece of jewelry twice. Yet her heart refused to slow. The finale gown hung in its own corner, draped like a crown jewel. Just looking at it made her chest ache with pride and dread. Victoria appeared, gliding through the crowd in a scarlet dress that commanded attention. Her smile was sugar, but her eyes glittered with malice. "Nervous, darling?" she asked, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. Savannah didn't look up from her clipboard. "Focused, focused," Victoria repeated, savoring the word. "Let's hope that focus holds. Shame if all your hard work fell apart at the last second." Savannah's head snapped up, but before she could respond, the stage manager called, "2 minutes to curtain." The music swelled. The crowd hushed. The first model stepped onto the runway, and the show began. From the wings, Savannah watched each look strut beneath the lights. Her designs, her vision came alive in front of the world. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Murmurs of approval rippled through the rows. Her pulse quickened, but pride bloomed too. She had done this. She had built something real. Then disaster. As the finale gown was being readied, Savannah caught sight of Victoria moving near the rack. Too near, a flash of silver glinted in her hand, a pair of shears. Time slowed. Savannah opened her mouth, but before she could shout, Victoria stumbled. The scissors slipped. A sickening rip echoed as the blade sliced through fabric. Gasps filled the air backstage. The finale gown sagged, its train torn nearly in half. Savannah's heart stopped. "No," she whispered, rushing forward, gathering the ruined fabric in her trembling hands. "No, no, no." The stage manager's voice boomed. "Finale model. 30 seconds?" Savannah's chest constricted. The piece de resistance, the culmination of months of labor destroyed. Behind her, Victoria covered her mouth in mock horror. "Oh dear, what an unfortunate accident. How careless of me." Savannah's vision blurred with panic. If the finale failed, the whole collection failed. She could hear the crowd buzzing already, expectant, impatient. Ethan appeared at her side like a shadow. "What happened?" Savannah's voice broke. "The gown, it's ruined." He scanned the damage, his jaw tightening, eyes flicking briefly to Victoria before returning to Savannah. "Can you fix it?" Her throat closed. "Not in 30 seconds. Then improvise," he said, his voice low, urgent. "You've got this. Don't let her win." His words jolted her. Improvise. Her mind spun, grasping for possibilities. Then, like a spark, the answer came. "Need scissors," she barked. An assistant shoved a pair into her hands. Savannah knelt, cutting away the shredded train with rapid precision. The fabric fell to the floor in a heap, and what remained was shorter, sharper gown transformed from sweeping drama into bold, architectural minimalism. She yanked a metallic belt from the accessories tray, cinching it tight around the model's waist. The effect was electric, edgy, modern, alive. The stage manager shouted, "Go, go, go, go." The models swept onto the runway. For a breathless moment, silence reigned. The audience blinked at the gown so different from the sketches in their press packets, so daringly abrupt. Then came the applause. It started tentative, then built into thunder. Cameras flashed, editors scribbled furiously, buyers leaned forward with hungry eyes. The gown was a triumph, not a mistake, a revelation. Backstage, Savannah sagged against the wall, tears burning her eyes. She had turned disaster into art. Beside her, Ethan watched the runway, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to her, voice rough. "You just saved the show." Her breath hitched. "I thought it was over." "You thought wrong," he said. His gaze softened, a rare smile breaking across his face. "I told you, you've got this." The crowd's roar swelled as the finale model reached the end of the runway, striking a pose that sent metallic threads sparking under the lights. Hashtags exploded online. Hashtag Urban Pulse. Hashtag Revolution Runway. Hashtag Savannah Miller. Victoria stood frozen in the wings, her face pale, lips pressed into a thin line. Her plan had failed worse. It had backfired. Savannah hadn't crumbled. She had risen higher, and Ethan had seen everything. When the last model exited, the audience surged to their feet in a standing ovation. The stage manager pushed Savannah forward, urging her to take a bow. She stumbled onto the runway, the lights blinding, the applause deafening. Her eyes swept the crowd and landed on Ethan, standing tall in the front row. He didn't clap with the others. Instead, he simply nodded, slow and deliberate, his gaze locked on hers. The message was clear. "You did it." Savannah bowed, her heart soaring, her fears dissolving in the glow of triumph. Backstage, chaos gave way to celebration. Assistants hugged, models whooped. Champagne bottles popped. Savannah slipped away to a quiet corner, pressing her palms to her face. Relief, joy, disbelief, they all crashed over her at once when she lowered her hands. Ethan was there. "You turned sabotage into brilliance," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. Her lips trembled into a smile. "I just didn't want to fail." "You didn't," he replied firmly. "You proved you belong here, and not because of me, because of you." The words wrapped around her like armor, like warmth she hadn't realized she craved. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. She belonged. Across the room, Victoria downed a glass of champagne, her nails biting into the stem. The laughter, the applause, the adoration, it all should have been hers, but it wasn't. And as she watched Ethan lean closer to Savannah, his expression softer than she had ever seen, the fury in her chest hardened into something darker. She had lost this battle, but the war wasn't over. Not yet. The applause still echoed in Savannah's ears, long after the crowd had filtered out of the venue. The runway lights dimmed, leaving only the backstage fluorescents buzzing overhead. The models had changed back into their street clothes. Assistants packed up garment bags, and the once chaotic atmosphere had given way to the heady afterglow of triumph. Savannah stood in the corner, clutching a glass of sparkling water someone had pressed into her hand. Her reflection in the mirror looked almost unrecognizable. Flushed cheeks, shining eyes, a woman who had survived the fire and come out stronger. The finale gown, still humming with the energy of the crowd's ovation, hung on its rack like a phoenix reborn. The jagged hem and cinched waist told a story not of ruin, but of reinvention. "You did it," whispered one of the seamstresses as she passed by. "You really did it." Savannah smiled faintly, her throat tight. "We did it." But she knew the truth. The improvisation, the risk, the gamble that had been her. For the first time in her life, she had stood on the edge of disaster and refused to fall. The after-party was held at a rooftop lounge overlooking the glittering city. Music pulsed, champagne flowed, and industry insiders buzzed about the collection. Savannah arrived late, still wearing the same simple black dress she had worked in all day, her hair hastily pinned up. She felt out of place among the sequins and tuxedos, but the moment she stepped inside, heads turned. "There she is," a buyer exclaimed, pulling her into the circle. "Savannah Miller, the name on everyone's lips tonight." That finale, gown genius, bold, revolutionary. Compliments showered over her, dizzying in their intensity. She nodded, smiled, murmured thanks, but her eyes kept scanning the crowd, and then she saw him. Ethan stood by the balcony, a glass of scotch in hand, city lights framing him like a portrait. He wore the same dark suit as always, but something about him tonight felt less untouchable, less distant. As if sensing her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, the party noise faded. He set down his glass and walked toward her, each step deliberate, his presence parting the crowd without effort. When he reached her, he didn't speak right away. He simply looked at her, as though memorizing every detail, as though the world could wait. Finally, his voice, low and steady, "You stole the night." Savannah's laugh was breathless. "I almost lost it." "But you didn't," he countered. "You turned a disaster into brilliance. That wasn't luck. That was you." She swallowed hard, her chest tightening. I thought I'd failed. You didn't fail, he said firmly. You proved what I've known for a while now. Her breath caught. And what's that? That you belong here. Not as an intern. Not as someone waiting in the wings, but as the future of this company. The words struck deep, filling every hollow place inside her. But before she could respond, a voice cut in. Well, Victoria drawled, stepping up with a glass of champagne. Her smile was brittle, her eyes sharp. What a touching moment. Savannah stiffened, but Ethan didn't flinch. He turned to Victoria, his expression like ice. You tried to sabotage her, he said flatly. The nearby conversations faltered. People turned, sensing drama. Victoria's laugh was airy, false. Sabotage? Don't be absurd. It was an accident. I saw you, Ethan said. His voice carried, hard and undeniable. You cut that gown, and yet she saved the show you tried to ruin. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face paled, her mask cracking. Ethan, you can't. Seriously, this isn't up for debate, he interrupted. Your ambition has crossed into malice, and that has no place in black couture. The silence was deafening. Victoria's hand trembled, champagne sloshing in her glass. You'd throw me aside for her. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. I'm not throwing you aside. You did that yourself. The words landed like a gavel. Victoria's eyes darted to Savannah, venomous. Enjoy this while it lasts, because nothing lasts forever. She stormed out, heels clicking like gunfire against the marble floor. Whispers swelled, but Ethan ignored them. He turned back to Savannah, his expression softening, though steel still lingered in his eyes. You don't need to fear her anymore, he said, quietly. Savannah's chest rose and fell, her heart pounding. You just ended it, in front of everyone. She ended it, he corrected. I just told the truth. Their eyes held, and in that suspended moment, the distance between them dissolved. Later, when the party began to thin, Ethan led Savannah to the balcony. The city sprawled below, alive and endless. The cool night air wrapped around them, quieting the noise from inside. For a while, neither spoke. They simply stood side by side, the silence between them charged, not empty. Finally, Savannah broke it. I don't know what happens next. Ethan turned, his gaze steady. What happens next is up to you. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I've pushed you hard, maybe too hard, but you've never once backed down. You've proved yourself, over and over, not to me, to yourself. The question is, where do you want to go from here? Her throat tightened. I want to keep designing, to keep creating, to build something that's mine. His lips curved, almost a smile. Then that's what you'll do. She searched his face, the sharp lines softened by the glow of the city. And you? He stepped closer, the space between them narrowing to a breath. I want to be by your side when you do it. Her heart stuttered. Ethan, this isn't about the company, he said, voice rough. This isn't about fashion. This is about you, and me, and the fact that somewhere along the way, you became the only person who makes this world feel less cold. The words stole her breath. She had dreamed of this moment, but dreaming hadn't prepared her for the way it made her chest ache, the way it made her want to both laugh and cry. Slowly, she reached for his hand. He caught it halfway, his fingers threading through hers with certainty, as though it had always been meant to fit this way. I don't know where this goes, she whispered. Neither do I, he admitted, but I know I don't want to face it without you. Her smile trembled, tears pricking her eyes. Then we'll face it together. And when he bent his head, when his lips brushed hers under the starlit sky, the city roared beneath them, but the world went silent. For the first time, Savannah wasn't the intern scrambling to prove herself. She wasn't the girl from Queens fighting to be seen. She was simply herself. And she was enough. Inside, the last guests trickled out, the buzz of the night still alive in their voices. Whispers of Savannah Miller's brilliance spread through the city like wildfire. By morning, her name would be splashed across headlines, her designs dissected by critics, her future cemented. But for now, on that balcony, none of it mattered. What mattered was the warmth of Ethan's hand, the steadiness of his gaze, and the knowledge that, after all the chaos, all the battles, all the sabotage, she had found both her place and her person, and nothing had ever felt more right. Spring sunlight spilled across Manhattan, gilding the glass towers and bustling streets below. The city pulsed with energy, but inside a quiet loft on the Lower East Side, the world felt still. Savannah stood at the center of the space, surrounded by bolts of fabric, half-finished sketches, and mannequins draped in experimental silhouettes. It was chaos, but it was hers. The brass plaque on the door read, "Miller Studio," her studio, the dream she had whispered to herself in the dark, the one she had scribbled on the backs of receipts as a teenager, the one she had feared was too big, too impossible. It was real now. She smoothed her hands over the cutting table, breathing in the scent of fabric and ink. In a few weeks, she would debut her first independent line. Critics were already buzzing, eager to see if the girl who had saved Urban Pulse could deliver again on her own terms. It terrified her, but it thrilled her more. Behind her, the door creaked open. "You're supposed to be taking a break," Ethan said, stepping inside with the easy authority of a man who had long since stopped knocking. Savannah turned, unable to stop the smile tugging at her lips. "This is my break." He arched a brow, surveying the scattered chaos. "Most people's breaks don't involve 3 sketch pads and 20 yards of silk." She shrugged, feigning innocence. "I'm not most people." "No," he said softly, crossing the room toward her. "You're not?" He carried 2 paper cups of coffee, setting one beside her. She accepted it gratefully, the warmth seeping into her fingers. "You've been working non-stop," he said, watching her carefully. "You don't have to prove anything anymore." "I know," she admitted, sipping the coffee. "But this isn't about proving anything. This is about creating something that's mine, something no one can take away." His eyes softened. "I like watching you fight for it." Her heart flipped, as it still did whenever he let his guard slip, whenever the steel of the CEO gave way to the man beneath. They stood in silence for a moment, the city humming faintly beyond the windows. Then Savannah set her cup down, nerves prickling. "There's a part of me that still can't believe any of this is real," she confessed. "The studio, the press attention." "You?" Ethan tilted his head. "Me," she smiled faintly. "Yes, you. The Ethan Black who used to look at me like I was in his way now shows up at my studio with coffee." He smirked. "Don't get used to it." "Too late," she teased. But then his smirk faded, replaced by something quieter. "Savannah, I know I wasn't easy to work with. I know I pushed too hard, sometimes for the wrong reasons. But the truth is," he hesitated, searching her face, "the truth is, you've changed everything for me. The company, the way I see the world, the way I see myself." Her breath caught. "I don't want to go back to who I was before you," he continued, his voice rough, "and I don't want to go forward without you." The words wrapped around her, like warmth, like certainty. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "You don't have to." His shoulders eased, tension melting away. For a man who had built his life on control, it was the purest surrender. The weeks passed in a blur. Reporters clamored for interviews, magazines requested previews, and buyers lined up for early looks. But through it all, Savannah stayed grounded. On the night of her debut, the venue was smaller than Black Couture's grand shows, but intimate, glowing with anticipation. Rows of editors, designers, and buyers sat beneath strings of warm light, chatter humming. Savannah peeked from the wings, her stomach a knot. "You're ready," Ethan murmured beside her, dressed in a simple black suit, his presence steady. She whispered back, "What if I'm not?" "Then I'll remind you," he said simply. The music began, and the first models stepped out, one by one. Her designs swept the runway, pieces born from late nights, from sketches crumpled and redrawn, from every risk she had dared to take. They weren't safe. They weren't expected. They were hers. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Murmurs of approval rippled. Pens scribbled furiously. Phones flashed when the finale model appeared, draped in a gown of shimmering midnight blue silk that caught the light like rippling water. The room fell silent. Then, as the model struck her pose, applause erupted. Savannah's knees nearly buckled. Ethan's hand was suddenly at her back, grounding her. "Go," he whispered. She stepped onto the runway, the applause swelling. Cameras snapped, voices called her name. But all she saw was Ethan at the edge of the stage, his gaze steady, his pride unmistakable. When she bowed, it wasn't just to the crowd. It was to herself, to the girl who had once believed she didn't belong, and to the woman who had finally claimed her place. The reviews the next day were glowing. A rising star, the headlines proclaimed. Savannah Miller reinvents contemporary couture. Her phone buzzed non-stop, opportunities flooding in. But when the frenzy quieted, she found herself back in her studio, curled on the worn couch with Ethan beside her. He read one of the articles aloud in mock solemnity. Savannah Miller brings raw authenticity to an industry obsessed with polish. He glanced over the page. "Not bad," she laughed, curling against him. "You sound jealous." "I'm not jealous," he said dryly. "Just making sure fame doesn't go to your head." She nudged him playfully. Too late. His arm slipped around her shoulders, pulling her closer. "Good. You deserve every bit of it." They sat in comfortable silence, the city's heartbeat pulsing through the windows. For once, there was no chaos, no sabotage, no looming disaster. Just them, and for Savannah, that was enough. Months later, the brass plaque outside the studio gleamed brighter, her name etched into the city's landscape. She still worked late, still sketched until her fingers cramped, still doubted herself on dark nights. But now, when the doubts crept in, she wasn't alone. Ethan would appear with coffee, with quiet encouragement, with a steady hand at her back. He didn't shield her from the world. He stood beside her as she faced it, and together, they built something new. Not just collections, not just a future in fashion, but a life where ambition and love could coexist. Because in the end, it wasn't just about clothes. It was about pulse, about rhythm, about the courage to step onto a stage and say, "This is who I am." And when Savannah did, the world listened.